in the middle of spring at dawn of May 10th, 1996, after a long struggle of love between God and us, our Heavenly Father decided to take Mom with him. Her 11 children watched her leave without a fuss, naturally, like she had lived. We fought to keep her here, and God, out of love, pulled on her. He was stronger, and now he has her with him in the eternal land where she awaits us. We have a date to meet in heaven, she used to say. We hope that these memories of Amparo that we share with you will serve as inspiration in this life, as she used to say, is beautiful, and that they help us make that appointment with God.
I've had a very happy life. I only have reasons to thank God.
Amparo used to talk a bit before dying, after 2 years and 3 months of illness. She was born on May 26, 1925, in Valencia, Spain. Her father, Alberto Portilla, engineering captain in the army, and her mother, Amparo Crespo, had married a year earlier. After their first daughter, they had 3 more children, Maria Julia, Mercedes, and Alberto. Amparo was baptized in the St. John and St. Vincent Church on the 31st of May, and her godparents were her grandparents, Evaristo Crespo and Francisca Hueso. When she was 6 years old, she started at the Sacred Heart School in Goya, a town near Valencia. She was very formal and responsible, and the nuns had great appreciation for her, to the point that she became well known because she had, as Mother Isabel Sáenz used to say, innate philosophy. Amparo spent her childhood and youth in this school in Goya, with great friends who would remain so during her entire life. They were happy years, full of anecdotes and stories that they remember even today with nostalgia.
Amparo had what we then used to call good spirit. She was always trying to make sure there were no conflicts, that no one could say anything bad about us religious women. She always tried to make sure that life was pleasant for all of us. That's the most important thing for me. The most important thing about Amparo.
There is one thing thinking about it that we realize later, that we never, ever heard her speak ill of anyone. Not only important things, but not even ironies, silly things, or things that could hurt, that could ridicule another person. Never, ever.
During the Spanish Civil War, the religious school she attended was closed down because Valencia ended up in the Republican side with lots of religious persecution. Her father was jailed because of his political ideas, and little Amparo visited him at the jail with her mother. On the 30th of December 1937, he was badly hurt by shrapnel during a bombing and arrived at the hospital already dead. Amparo and her mother, desolate, went there. Later, when her father's body was at home, she spent the night of the 31st of December praying and crying next to him. Due to her age, she was aware of the tragedy that had just befallen the family before her brothers and sisters. As the oldest, she felt the responsibility more directly. This led her to mature rapidly, making her more serious and reserved. Her mother relied on her a lot during this period. Those years were especially tough for the entire family because the cruelty of war arrived with the death of their father, so they were very short of money. During the bombings, instead of going down to the shelters, the family stayed at home praying until they stopped. But Amparo never complained, nor showed the slightest bitterness or hatred towards those who killed her father. She simply prayed for him and his salvation, together with her mother, who fought to keep the family united and raised them in a Christian environment.
At home, my mother was very religious, really. Hardly anyone else really went to Mass, but she had very clear ideas about religion. She went to daily Mass, She didn't hold on to anything. She didn't draw attention to herself. But she had very deep ideas, and Amparo got all that from our home.
Well, my mother had, although I didn't realize at the time. I realized later. She had a magnificent virtue. When she became a widow, she gave herself to us completely. That made it possible for us to have a homey atmosphere. We prayed every night at home.
The war ended and Amparo went back to school. In her last years as a student, she worked and got a perfect record. She received the Good Behavior Band and the Daughter of Mary Medal. She and all of her friends made a pact of a common goal.
We decided on a goal that the nun who took care of us told us about, to ensure that we never committed a mortal sin. That was the first one. And the second one, which is sweeter for me, was that I never went to bed at night without praying 3 Hail Marys to the Virgin. And I think we've all kept it up because when some of us meet, those of us that live in Valencia, we always remember that promise that we made, that we never stop praying 3 Hail Marys to the Virgin at night.
As a personal goal, Amparo chose the motto, "Move away from me, Mother, whatever moves me away from you," showing her deep love of the Virgin already at such a young age. Finally, in 1944, she passes the final state exam, which at the time meant the end of secondary education as she leaves school. Once she leaves, she studies teaching and child care. At the same time, she directs the catechism at the Santa Cruz Church in a humble neighborhood of Valencia. She's constantly charitable with the children that come there, generously helping them and their families with anything she can. Her spirit of sacrifice is reflected in the following anecdote. When those poor children did their first communion, Amparo took their suits home to wash and iron them, filling the bathtub with lice. Amparo had a deep-seated spirit of service. She was an example of Christian life from the beginning. She always lent a hand in moments of trouble. She knew what needed to be done. She never hesitated. She never spoke ill of anyone, and if someone exceeded themselves in their behavior, she always found a reason to excuse them. Wherever Amparo was, she drew attention. If boys approached the group, she always stood by them. She said kind things to all of them. She was very pretty. Many young men fell in love with her, but she was delicately prudent with all of them.
She truly was very pretty. She had great sweetness in her face. She was very kind to everyone. She was never violent with anyone. When she didn't like boys, and there were lots of those, she told them no, but gently, setting them up with other girls from Valencia, friends of hers, with whom they later married.
She had a very nice gesture with 2 brothers. She liked one of them, but both of them liked her. There were arguments between them and they started fighting, when in fact, they had always gotten on very well. In view of this, she broke up with both of them so that they wouldn't fight, but she really did like one of them.
Even before she got married, Amparo had the disposition to bear the children that God saw fit to send her. It was a subject she was very clear on, as can be understood from this letter to a cousin of hers.
Children are a gift from God. He gives them to us in deposit, not in ownership. We can't have them for our own satisfaction, to enjoy them and then direct their lives. They are beings that He gives for us to form and to prepare for God, which is the reason we're in the world. So parents have to know how to give them up when the time comes.
At that time, I'd already had my 4th daughter, and I wasn't happy about it. Poor little thing. I always say so. And she came to me. She came to see her mother. I was angry, in a bad mood, as I say, so I told her. She said to me, "Do you know what I feel? If I can't have lots of children, I'm not getting married because, for me, maternity is the most important part of marriage. The fact is that I stopped being upset.
Every child, when I was expecting it and before having it, how much I wanted to have several. I don't know. It's a new being, and man is the best thing of all creation. He sums up in intelligence and values the best of the whole creation. So every time that I had a child, I thought, and I hoped it was God's will, that none of them were a failure. I thought that I was bringing a new being to the world, intelligent, capable of carrying inside them lots of values of love, understanding, of relationships with other people, of helping, and that it could help others. And even if often I get angry and I think that maybe it's a failure because they fight, because they get angry, because they don't want to help, but maybe it's because they're still being formed, and someday they will be useful people.
At the end of 1947, God had prepared a date with human love for her. One afternoon in Valencia, walking along a busy street with a friend, she met a nice young man. His name was Federico Romero. They met again, they fell in love, and Amparo thought that opportunities don't come around twice in life.
I met Amparo one day when I was leaving Mass. I was walking along Paz Street in Valencia. It was a day for walking. I met her with some friends. It was the first time that we met. I don't remember the day exactly. I know that it was at the end of 1947.
Theirs was a pure love, total, in keeping with God's plan for her. She once wrote to her future husband in one of the 300 letters that they kept during their courting period.
Fede, you love me like I had dreamed of being loved. I asked Jesus to separate us if you or I were to be an obstacle for the other's salvation. Then I immediately asked him never to do that.
The relationship between Amparo and I was like any courting relationship of the time. Quite different from what one hears or now sees on television. But that doesn't mean that we didn't love each other a lot. We had mutual respect, and we took care of all the ways of living it. I even remember that before we married, we both agreed to undertake a tradition that we had heard about. It was called the Tobias Nights. It meant that for the first 3 days, the marriage wasn't consummated, like in the book of Tobias in the Old Testament. She thought it was a very good idea, and that's what we did. It is a very good memory that we've carried our whole lives.
They married on November 29, 1950. Some delightful photographs exist of the happy ceremony. They weren't years of great abundance, but it was a dignified event. They then moved to live in Madrid. 11 children were born from their love: Federico, Asuncion, Amparo, Carmen, Enrique, Nuria, Santiago, Miguel, Luis, Ángeles, and Paz. Also in the first years, Amparo goes through 3 miscarriages and 2 periosteostomies, and she doesn't forget to baptize, when possible, the unborn children. Even before her children were born, Amparo already offers them to the Lord, telling him that if they are not to be saved when they become adults, to take them now. And she asks first for their souls to be saved, and only after that, that they be healthy, intelligent, and handsome. She decided that they all be baptized within the first 3 days of life and that all of her daughters carry a name in honor of the Virgin. In 1953, the couple joins the Apostolic Family Works, later the Christian Family Movement, where they ended up with leading roles. Their object was to get closer to God, to do apostolate with married couples and engaged couples through studies, chats, and retreats. In 1961, they are made members of the Second Congress of the Spanish Family, in which they actively intervened to give it an orientation in accordance with Catholic doctrine. Her concern with good doctrine led her to collaborate with a Catholic institution called Library and Documentation, writing critical votes of moral and literary content on books that she read. She knew that one has to talk to children about Jesus and about Our Lady from a very young age, teaching them to pray and leading them on a life of piety. Her children never forgot it.
I remember that from a very young age, she educated us in deep piety. In very simple things, she taught us to pray, Jesus of my life, the typical prayers that mothers teach their children, and the guardian angel. When we became a bit older, I remember that she taught us to say 3 Hail Marys at night, asking for purity. We went to Mass every day, but she didn't force us when we were very little. On Sundays, she encouraged us. We also said the Rosary as a family.
When we'd be in the car, we'd almost always say the Rosary. We made sure that each child was in charge of one of the mysteries so that they would participate more. At home, it was funny because in the apartment next to ours, there were some friends of ours who had several children, and there was only a thin wall between us. Apparently, when their children were asleep, the couple said the Rosary, and we could hear it from our apartment, and often we said the Rosary in answer to them without them knowing it.
The couple took great care to choose schools which properly combined human and religious education for their children. We have to remember that Amparo studied at the Sacred Heart of Goya. The good Christian education that she received there is what she wanted for her daughters. She enrolled them in the Sacred Heart of Madrid. The boys went to a Marianist school, Santa Maria de Pilar. In order to reduce cost, Amparo had to take lunch for her children every day so that they could eat it in the cafeteria. What did it matter if it meant a big economic effort, if it was the best for her children? Amparo fought hard for the Christian values that her children should receive, and she didn't hesitate to complain about the mistakes made in lots of schools in those times.
She also went to the parents' meetings at the school, and sometimes she'd see that things weren't being done according to Catholic doctrine. Then she intervened. She intervened to make things clear, and they suggested she stop going to those meetings. That's when she thought, well, I'm going to compensate what I see they are not being taught, where there are things missing or mistakes.
My mother, as well as looking for schools where her children could get a good education, also wanted us to keep growing up with a good education, with that Christian and human education. She knew of some clubs, some of them run by the Opus Dei, that were educational day centers with cultural and recreational activities and also spiritual. And she wanted us to go there to get a good education and for it to help us behave like good Christians later in life.
Amparo knew that freedom is essential to be able to love God. That's why she didn't press her children. She guided them in the good use of that divine gift. At the same time, she made them see that to exercise personal freedom, one must also have a personal responsibility.
I think that we're a very close family, that we all love each other, and like a song my children want to sing, we make up one single heart, and we're never separated, neither by distance nor anything.
From 1963 onwards, the family spent their summers in Riaza, a beautiful village in Segovia. Until then, they had spent them on the Spanish coast. But those years coincided with the time that tourism reached Spanish beaches, with the corresponding deterioration of manners. The couple didn't approve of their older children witnessing certain scenes and decided to change the beach for the mountains.
Amparo, who was very sure of herself, went to see the mayor and she told him. The mayor answered that yes, she was right, and that they'd see if they could do something. He didn't do anything, there wasn't much he could do. So then we decided to leave a place like that and spent the summers of the following years, until Amparo got ill before she died, in a village in the Central Mountains. That is to say, that we changed our lives so that our children didn't directly perceive bad examples.
In Riaza, Amparo was very much appreciated because she greeted everyone nicely and sweetly showed an interest in people and their needs. A practical example of her worry not to discriminate against anyone is that she would shop in all of the bread stores and all of the other shops in order to be fair, even if she had to go further to get there. But it wasn't only in the details, but in more important acts. There was a family there that had difficulties taking care of their small daughters. Amparo couldn't go herself due to her obligations, but she managed to get her daughter Nuria to go and help the needy mother.
It was truly wonderful to go to Mass with Amparo in Riaza. The walk back, a walk that should last some 5 or 10 minutes, would take 45 to 50 minutes for Amparo, because she'd stop at the corners, at the balconies, to greet her neighbors of Riaza, always asking them about family members which she knew to be ill, or how they were, how was work, the children. I always thought that it wouldn't have been possible. Amparo didn't have the memory that her husband Federico had. If it weren't that she wished them well so often, thought about them, or prayed for them.
One of the things that Amparo most liked about Riaza was the fact that the village patron was Our Lady of the Shawl, because she always invoked the Virgin, asking her to protect her children under her shawl. There's a hermitage in Riaza called de Ontanares, which has Our Lady of the same name inside it, and to whom Amparo made more than one promise. Her home was an open and welcoming house. Everybody slept there. Siblings and the children that no longer lived there, her grandchildren, cousins, friends of her children, and even people she didn't know who had no money to pay for a room.
I think the fact that we were so many children influenced my mother, because she always used to say that where 13 eat, so can 15 or 16. Since she had to do it anyway, it didn't really matter. Our friends, family, cousins, all came. I remember that during the summer in Riaza, we were never alone. That's where we spent the summer, well, for many years, and always someone's friends would come and spend a couple of days, or cousins, or people passing by. Those were different times, not like now, and several girls were passing by. They didn't have anywhere to stay, and there was nowhere there. There were girls that we didn't know, but they came to stay in our house. It was a special thing. We'd feed them, prepare some beds. She didn't mind.
Amparo helped in retreats that were organized in Riaza, attending and inviting all her friends and people she knew. She always took notes of the meditations and extracted her conclusions.
I want to give myself to God through the love for my husband, my children, and as much as possible, others. The Lord comes to meet me in whatever situation. Loving my husband is the way to love him. I have the grace, but I'm not conscious. I must love them all with their defects. After Mount Tabor, Peter denied the Lord. I ask and hope that after this Mount Tabor that the Lord gives me, to be faithful to him always, to have a firm determination not to go back, to advance every day behind him.
Everyone who knew Amparo agrees that her most characteristic trait was her smile. She was always happy. She laughed a lot at jokes, anecdotes, or humorous movies.
Rather than a sense of humor, which she did have because she laughed a lot, it was her smile, constantly smiling. Sense of humor? Well, yes, of course. When one is happy, it's easy to have a sense of humor. Well, during her illness, she had to console us. When I found out about how she was, what she had, I called her and she was the one who cheered me up. And the truth is, that was very impressive. That's the truth.
That passion, that way of enjoying life was contagious, that happiness for life. I remember on trips with nature, one would say, well, but she would say, look at how beautiful everything is. Enjoy, notice things. She made us enjoy all the small details in life, and she always found the positive side. She found it throughout all her life, and obviously she also found it in her illness.
She was very friendly, and she knew how to do these things very well, certainly much better than me. The way she treated and corrected, but was never imposing.
Amparo was kind but tenacious, more liberal than demanding, and an efficient advisor when asked, because her position when confronting a problem was to take it from a kind position. She was cultured and had a great sensibility for art, literature, and music. She treated her servants exquisitely and with respect, without the slightest touch of superiority. She also extended that to their families, trying to tend to their needs in terms of health and work. She even spent her spare time teaching those who couldn't read and write.
She taught me to read and write every Thursday. When she and I and a friend of mine went out, we bought some notebooks and she wrote some examples and we started copying them, and that's how we started to learn to read and write.
When she was sick, a Moroccan woman used to come to work here, and she followed Ramadan. She worried a lot about that woman. She would walk into the house and she'd say, "Has Fatima arrived? Tell her to leave, poor woman. She hasn't eaten anything. Pay her and tell her to go home and rest." I felt very much loved by Amparo, valued and loved the way I was.
The whole family remembers Fernanda, the seamstress that helped Amparo 2 afternoons a week.
This woman, she had no social security. She used to come in to work at home by the hour. She'd come in a couple of hours. My mother paid the whole of her social security so that she would get a pension, and she paid it out of her own pocket so that that woman wasn't left unprotected.
She paid her employees premarital courses and cared for their spiritual life. They prayed the Angelus every day together.
I'd help her to wash, to clean the house. She'd help me hang up the washing. She was very nice, very nice. And at 12, she'd say, "Heavens, 12 o'clock." And I'd say, "Go on, start," and we'd pray the Angelus.
When you'd eat, she'd say the blessings. At night, she'd say the rosary. And when she got up in the morning, every day she'd say, "Good morning, Lord. Another day that brings me closer to you." That's the truth.
On her experience with God, Amparo wrote,
You mustn't probe God. God isn't to be understood. You just have to give yourself into His arms and love Him. It's so easy to become bourgeois, to close your eyes to others' problems. I'm afraid of seeing myself every day seeking more material or spiritual comfort.
Amparo had a lot of faith in divine providence. Her faith was innate, but it grew in her, like her other virtues, until it became something natural, with no room for doubt. Once she was very ill, all she did was to be consequent with the faith that she had professed and practiced during her entire life.
What mattered to her was to do God's will, and that we, her children, went to heaven. She always said that we had a date in heaven. That's one of the things that most mattered to her. In fact, she offered her life, and God accepted the offering of her life for the salvation of her children, because that's what mattered most to her, that we were in His grace and that we all reach heaven.
She always had God in the forefront. Nothing was impossible for her. Everything was good. She used to say, if it's God's will, and you'll see how God does it, and things like that.
I would highlight, out of this soul's values, the deep faith that she had in God's giving, in God's will, whatever God wants, whatever He wants. Her togetherness, which gave her enormous strength to lead her life with love in the pain that she carried, and her deep love of God and her neighbors. She was always so prudent that she never allowed herself to talk badly of anyone.
In the face of any adverse situation, she would turn to God and pray for a solution. She always counted on the Lord and had great peace knowing herself to be in His hands. She lived in the hope of all Christians, and with it she confronted adversity with the faith and happiness of those who give themselves to God. She had hope. She trusted to be able to enjoy eternal life in the divine love that she had started to sense in this world. Humble and sure of God's compassion and forgiveness, she knew that in the end of our lives we will be judged in love. Those who knew Amparo agree on something that always surprised them all. She would never criticize. She avoided gossip and slander. She always looked on people's good side and forgave their defects. She treated everyone very well. She never said anything that could hurt anybody. She was always prepared to listen and to help. The most notorious thing about Amparo was her affectionate and cordial charity. She was a kind and affable woman.
She would always find something good to say about a person. When someone criticized, she'd say, no, that person has such and such a quality, or some other good thing. Or someone that looked like a nice person, but that no one really knew. And one day somebody would say that she was unfriendly. She'd say, but she looks like such a nice person.
I felt that one of her defects was lack of frankness. If a man is ugly, he's ugly. But she'd say, no, he's not ugly. He's just not as handsome as so-and-so. But Amparo, he's horrible, I'd say. That always surprised me because it was a defect. She wasn't telling the truth. But it's not that she wasn't telling the truth. Maybe she was just practicing another type of charity that we didn't practice.
Natural about it, without lecturing doctrine at all hours, she helped others get closer to God, respecting everyone's freedom. She didn't impose. She suggested. She taught the girls that worked with her and their children the catechism, how the relationships with the opposite sex had to be, and the way to pray. Until the end of her life, she made sure that her friends, children, and acquaintances remained close to Christ. She oriented and said what was in accordance with God's law. She had offered her life for her children's salvation soon before getting ill, and our Lord accepted the offer, sending her an illness that turned out to be deadly. But her suffering was not in vain. It produced many changes in attitude and brought her children and acquaintances closer to the faith. During Christmas of 1993, Amparo didn't feel well. She had had several pneumonias in the last years. On the 2nd of February 1994, she went to the hospital in Madrid to have her thorax x-rayed. It set off alarms. Doctors discovered the stain that revealed lung cancer in her right lung.
I remember in the afternoon, when we were alone, I told her what was happening, and she asked me some questions. I answered what we knew at the time. I thought she was very affected by this news, but then she went towards her room, singing a song called La Vie en Rose by Edith Piaf.
For those who don't believe in eternal life, illness can seem absurd. Amparo knew that by offering God her suffering with love, she honored Him. She sanctified herself and enjoyed many graces from Him. Like a good daughter, she had no fear. She knew herself to be in His hands while she submitted to the medical treatments.
Once she said to me, Carmen, I'm meditating a lot about the prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, before they detained Jesus and all the passion, because he didn't look forward to that either, to what was coming. And she says to me, I don't look forward to it either. She knew what was awaiting her. I don't look forward to it, but God's will must be done, I say.
I was shocked because she called me on the phone and said to me, laughing, "Listen, Mari Carmen, do you know I have cancer?" She said to me. "But what are you saying, Amparo?" I said. And laughing, she told me just like that. I was, it's true. She always dealt with it wonderfully. And also when they operated on her, and she still worried about everyone else and calling. Yes, she was truly exemplary. How lucky, I think, it was her faith and her Christianity.
On Monday, the 7th of the same month, she received the first cycle of chemotherapy. She responded very well to the treatment, and the tumor was reduced to half. So they decided to give her 5 more cycles. Her hair fell out, her eyelashes, eyebrows, and she suffered a deep physical deterioration. On the 4th of November, after receiving the sacrament of the sick, she was operated on. In the beginning, they were only going to remove some lobules, but they had to take the whole of her right lung out. She was in intensive care for 36 hours, after which she was moved to a room. She constantly smiled and thanked everyone for everything. But a fistula was to appear. On December 1st, the doctors allowed her to go home. Before doing so, they taught her children to cure the fistula until it closed. They ended up doing around 700 cures.
I came in during the cures. They'd dress me, put a little hat on, a mask to cover my mouth, and I'd go in with them to do the cures. But it was in a good atmosphere, not one of pain or anguish. It was fine, because she was my grandmother, and she didn't complain, and she was calm, and I liked going in there. And then, when we finished, my grandmother would smile and say that we had done very well and thanked us.
Sometimes a daughter would ask her if she was sad, and she would say, "I'm happy. You all love me a lot, and God gives me this. I want whatever God wants, and I accept it." And you could see that she wasn't just saying it. She felt it.
They carried out analysis and test, and everything seemed to be going okay until September the 13th, 1995. The feared diagnosis is confirmed: metastases in the brain, suprarenal glands, bones, and the remaining lung. The fight becomes harder. It's time to embrace the cross harder, with more love. She is given another 20 sessions of radiotherapy, but they have to suspend them because she couldn't take any more.
I heard her reciting poems by Jorge Manrique in the hallways, the ones about the death of his father that say, "Wanting to live, man, when God wants you to die, is madness." She realized that we were doing everything possible, but maybe God's will was for her to leave. We did our best. She did her best to live, because she fought to live. But accepting that God wanted to take her, she never rebelled against that.
She used to say, as long as one person confesses and gets near to God, this illness is worth it. And I used to say, Mom, wouldn't a cold do? And she'd say, it's worth it. To be near God is more important than this.
Keeping up her fight against the disease, Amparo agreed to go to Badalona to consult Dr. Rosell, who sent her to a session of radiosurgery, the most painful so far, but which allowed her to die fully conscious. Amparo always accepted her disease as a Christian, not only with resignation, but loving God's will. On one occasion, one of her daughters asked her if she was afraid, and she answered,
"Look, I have left everything in God's hands, and I have great peace and calmness inside me. And I know that it's something that the Lord gives me. When I see all of you suffering, sometimes because there's news about the disease spreading, I keep my inner peace, and I realize that it's a gift from God."
On the 23rd of March, her daughter Angeles got married. Amparo could just barely get up to be in the photographs. but she didn't have enough strength to go down to the church. The celebration was at her house. She was happy seeing all the family come by to her room to spend time with her.
It was the same with the nurses. They had to do 1,000 painful tests, punctures, take blood, etc. And always a smile, and she'd ask, "Where are you from? Ah, are you pregnant? Do you have any kids already?" Many times I found those nurses crying in the hallway, and they'd say, "It's not normal to meet a woman like that."
The last time we went to visit Amparo, Federico and his daughter Nuria received us in the living room. We didn't think that we'd be able to see her because she was already in a bad way and she hardly ever got out of bed. Nevertheless, a moment later, Federico called us in, saying that Amparo wanted to see us in the bedroom. My wife and I went in. Amparo was in bed, and she was able to say some loving words and give us a touching kiss. I had the feeling then, and later, when I've thought about it, that Amparo said goodbye to us then. I have never had such a clear idea that someone was so close to heaven in every sense of the word.
On Wednesday, the 8th of May, she receives communion for the last time. She smiles and gives thanks. On Thursday, the 9th, at 11 at night, she begins breathing with difficulty. Her temperature goes up. At 3:45, when she's breathing more slowly, she opens her blue eyes, but with a lost look. She died a few seconds later. She was left with an expression of peace and a smile on her lips. Just as her life was an example for many to see how to apply a Christian mother's virtues to everyday life, her long illness offered family and friends an example to identify with Christ's pain. She joined her suffering with that of Jesus on the cross to participate in humanity's redemption as purification and reparation of sins. She had experienced that to have the cross is to have happiness because it is to have Him, the Lord. Only then can we understand the comforting effect that it had on those who were close to her during her last years. She is buried on the 11th in the San Justo Sacramento Cemetery in Madrid. Years later, she was moved to the Almudena Cathedral crypt in the large San Fernando Chapel. During the days following the burial, masses for Amparo were held in Valencia, Navarra, Sevilla, and Riaza.
Just in the same way that I said that Amparo improved with time, I can say that with time, I have grown to love her more and more each day from the day I met her.
On the 23rd of May, 1996, the proceedings to initiate the process of beatification begin. The initiative came from the family itself, who were later joined by their closest friends. An association was formed which worked on the requirements of canon law. They and many others were prepared to confirm her fame as a saint. The cause found an experienced postulator in the person of the Dominican father Crescencio Palomo.
Amparo's process, as a married woman, has to be viewed from this perspective. For saints are not to be put inside a glass display case. Saints exist to be shown to the faithful, and they, seeing their virtues, take as fine example, since all Christians are called to sanctity.
When examining testimonies about Amparo Portilla's life, there is no doubt that amongst the people that met her, everyone agrees that she was an extraordinarily good person. They agree that Amparo fought to sanctify herself in ordinary life, serving God through dedication to her family, her husband, and her 11 children. It follows that the most heroic manifestations of her virtues came, in many cases, from inside her home, in the keeping of it, and in her behavior with family, friends, and acquaintances. And this is so because, in spite of many occupations derived from her family, Amparo never stopped worrying about others. She treated everyone with true charity, which led to sincere friendship, through which Amparo tried to lead those souls toward a meeting with God. For ordinary laymen, this is a closer example than that of priests or people in religious orders.
For me, Amparo's sanctity is in the surprising normality of family life. A Christian woman, a devoted wife and mother, faithful to her mission. That is what God asked of her. That is what she accomplished till the end. That is sanctity, to comply with God's will until the end, and without complaint.
I often ask myself how Amparo would react to a certain situation or person. How would Amparo get something positive out of this person or react positively to that one? I think of her because she always managed to do it.
I think my mother is not just a saint. She's an example of how to lead a normal, everyday life close to God. That's why I think she's an example of sanctity for all Christians.
I'm no one to say if she is a saint or not. For me, she is. And in fact, I talk to Amparo with great devotion. And I tell her, Amparo, you are my friend. And I am your friend, but don't forget about me.
The fame of Amparo's sanctity has extended and grown from the moment of her death. The first favors attributed to her, received at the Association for the Cause of the Canonization of Amparo Portilla, came from those who knew her in life, but currently there are many people who say that they talk to Amparo daily, asking for her help without even knowing her. There are even some testimonies of graces and favors in places as distant as the Philippines, the United States, and Mexico. Amongst the testimonies received of her fame of sanctity, which arrive at the Association's archives, are several stories of favors, both spiritual and material. Especially meaningful is the one relating to the healing of her own daughter, Asuncion, who was diagnosed with a tumor in the apophyses, which produced several ailments as well as stability problems. When the doctors saw the MRI, they decided not to operate because due to its location, there was great risk of damaging vital organs. They decided to let the tumor follow its course, with the danger of it damaging the parts where it developed. But her mother always prayed for her healing, and at the moment of her death, something amazing happened.
There were two things the doctor told me which weren't normal. They were like two favors that had been granted to me. One was that when they took me off my medication, my prolactin increased slowly and not at full speed, which was what he expected, because that would have been the norm, for it to go up suddenly, which is something that I wouldn't have resisted. And another was that when my mother died, my tumor disappeared completely. I felt that no medicine could ease my nervous tension, and I felt how it suddenly disappeared. I was totally calm. Another thing was the loss of balance that I sometimes had. It also disappeared. It disappeared. I felt it at first at the wake. We had a funeral mass, and I stood there without losing my balance at all. My general swelling also went down, slowly, without me doing anything special. From the start, I thought I was healed, but I didn't say anything to anyone because the doctors had to confirm it and do tests. But I was convinced that I had received a favor from my mother, and I attribute it to her.
Asuncion tells us about another favor that happened to her sister Nuria.
When my mother died, it was not just my healing, it was also my sister Nuria's. She had an allergy to her own sweat, which produced sores and had no cure. And it disappeared when my mother died. There's no explanation, because they hadn't found a cure to this allergy. And I also attribute this favor to her.
Amongst many other favors attributed to Amparo that are published on the information bulletin about her canonization cause, we chose some related to health, work, and money problems.
Due to an accident in which I suffered a hard blow, I became an invalid in a wheelchair. Before operating on me, the doctor told me that I had a 50% chance of being more or less all right. I automatically asked Amparo for help in desperation, and on the third day, I felt a chill run through my body, and I slowly started leaving the wheelchair until I recovered and I avoided the operation. Of course, I attribute this improvement to Amparo because on the third day of praying to her, as soon as I finished the prayer, was when I felt the chill that I couldn't explain because I was lying in bed. I would go from the bed to the wheelchair, and just then I was lying there, relaxed in bed. And that chill I felt came with a great alleviation from the pain. And when I walked, I could, first with one leg, and then with the other, and without the pain.
My husband and I decided to do a novena, but a utopic novena, because what we wanted was for that novena to bring me a job that was compatible with my daughters, with my family life, and that provided economic aid. I didn't mind what kind of job it was, of course. That was at the end of August, and when we came back from holidays at the end of September, we got home and I was called in for an interview at the job that I had to give up in February. It was a very similar job economically to the previous one that I had left, but it was a very important professional improvement. And it was like that. Of course, we totally attribute it to Amparo, and I tell everyone, and I like to talk about Amparo because we are sure that it was because of her intercession.
At that time, we needed to sell the house that we had because we had put a down payment on another house, a big down payment. And we thought that in 8 or 9 months, which is what the sale process would take, until we signed the contract of the next house, we would have time to sell it. The problem was that months went by and we couldn't sell the house, and both my husband and I had lost all hope of selling it. Of course, this meant that we would lose the down payment, and it was money that we had worked hard for. I remembered that I had Amparo's stamp, and we started to do a novena tour. And it was surprising because in 4 days a couple came, and they took 24 hours to make up their mind. That is to say that in 24 hours they decided to keep the house. So I attributed that miracle to Amparo because really the experiences we had had with other potential buyers had been very different. I really think that it was Amparo that made the sale come through, and we will be eternally grateful to her.
Barely 5 months after her death, on the 17th of December 2001, at Our Lady of the Sacred Heart of Madrid Church, the opening for the process of canonization for Amparo Portilla took place. It was presided by the Cardinal Archbishop of Madrid, Antonio Maria Rocco, and more than 400 people were there. The Cardinal praised Amparo's virtues and encouraged everyone to recognize the importance of matrimonial and family vocation for the edification of the Church. He reminded us that the Holy Father insisted we discover the vocation of Christians who live their Christian lives as laymen, husbands, fathers, and mothers, and that we see sanctity in them. A saint is one who has dedicated oneself to Jesus, one in whom you can see the figure of the Lord and the Lord's life.
She gave the world the example of being a married woman, a woman in a true Christian marriage, where the main thing she sought was for God to be present in matrimony in order to do good for others.
Amparo Portilla's life is a luminous example of the fact that sanctity is a universal call, that it is not reserved to priests or people in religious orders. It is accessible to all lay people, married or single, even those who, like Amparo, don't belong to any church movement or institution. God's paths are varied, but for the majority, the place to meet Christ is in ordinary life, at work, or in the mundane occupations of the home, In the middle of this, Amparo tried to live all of her virtues to their best, with nothing strange, with happiness, radiating the light of Christ, a human, lovable model accessible to all, very needed in this, our 21st century.